It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce my colleague and, more importantly, my friend, Ed Rapp. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yep. Please. Good to see you. Please. I would suggest you hold that until the end, and then you can be the judge if it's worth that time or not. With a retirement type situation, a presentation like this isn't kind of the norm. And there's really two reasons that we're having this discussion tonight, if you would. Number one is I've given it through the years. I always said in an audience like this, if I had impacted one person in a positive way, then I would consider it worth the effort. And upon the announcement of my retirement, with the number of cards and letters I received that reflected on this presentation, I thought, well, maybe I did have an impact along the way. The other one, Joe Holzman, are you here? Joe sent me an email, and in the email, right there, Joe, he had the courage. He sent a link to a presentation called The Last Lecture, and it's a very moving lecture about life that's worth the view. But his challenge to me is, would you give a last lecture at CAT? So, Joe, I really appreciate the encouragement. And for me, if I'm going to give a last lecture, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. As you see, I talk about this as strike the balance. And what I consider a modern-day challenge. And I call it the modern-day challenge because of some of the things I think are just prevalent in today's world. I mean, recent surveys have indicated that 57% of families think mobile technology has ruined their definition of a family dinner. In a recent survey on communication between parents and adolescent teenagers, they say the average discussion is about a minute and a half a day. And many times that's to pick up your room or turn your music down. Today, the percent of families that are dual income is the highest it's ever been. And that's not saying that that's good or bad. It's just saying that it makes it a bigger challenge to strike the balance. And on top of all that, the world has just gotten more competitive. I mean, for the new people that are coming in to Caterpillar or other companies that may be here tonight, you got it a lot tougher than what I had when I started in '79. I mean, we weren't dealing with Chinese competitors, Russia, Central Europe, other parts of the world. Latin America was going through crisis, literally every few years. It's gotten a lot more competitive, which means the demands from a work perspective are a lot greater. And so that's why I do think it is a modern day challenge. Now, I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to do a presentation on work-life balance. The way I got started in this journey was when Jim Owens became chairman. He designed a program called Quest, Leadership Quest. And they went out to leaders throughout our organization and said, what are the things you want to hear about as leaders? What are the topics that you want on the agenda? And one of them was balance. How do you strive to get better balance in your life? Having a great personal life, but also a great professional career. At the time, the dean of the College of Leadership at Cat University was a young man named Chris Arvin. Chris and I had worked together, but also knew each other outside of work. And since Jim was pushing for having officers teach the program, Chris came to me and said, hey, I need you to do this. And I tell you, I really appreciate the push from both Jim and Chris, because when you talk about this topic, it just forces you to reflect. And what you need to understand, my comments today are comments on where I'm at this point in time in the journey. I still have a lot to learn, but having this as something that I was able to communicate over time has helped me on my journey as well. So that's kind of how we got here today. Now, the hard part up front was, I think a big part of leadership is you do it through storytelling. And if you're going to cover a topic like work-life balance, it's got to get more personal than most of the presentations that we do. And for you to maybe understand who I am and the balance I try to strike, I think you have to get to know me and kind of who I am. I hail from Pilot Grove, Missouri, population 700. In fact, I was back recently. It's 713 now. And I always reflect on that because I never want to forget where I come from. And it was such a great place to grow up. If you know me, I was one of 7 kids. I'm the middle. I have 3 older brothers and 3 younger sisters. And as I always explained to my mom and dad, I am the neglected middle child. And her response was always the same: with 7 kids, you're all neglected, get over it. But the reality of it is, there was no neglect. I mean, even in the early days when it was 7 kids, 2 parents, and a dog, in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. We were loved. We had the warmth of brothers and sisters who are still such an amazing part of my network. But that gives you a little bit of a feel for the environment that I was raised in. I finished high school and wanted to go to university. A lot of people talk about, college search, traveling with their parents, visiting universities. Mine was pretty simple. University of Missouri was 30 miles down the road. I could come home on weekends and work summers, and that was kind of the deal that I had with my parents. Work weekends and summers, and they put me through college, and it was one of the great gifts that they gave me. But like everybody else went to school, 4 years went way too fast, and I get to the end, and I was a finance major, but I really didn't want to go, into where most of my colleagues went, banking. And Caterpillar came on campus, and I was intrigued by, as I did the research, the global nature of the business. And that's really what attracted me to CAT. And I remember asking the recruiter, is it really possible to come to a company like CAT and experience the global nature of the business? And I've used this quote 1,000 times. He said, young man, Caterpillar is a company, if you work hard and apply yourself, you can see the world and get paid to do it. And that's exactly what I've been doing since 1979. And you can see the postcodes in terms of those journeys. That simple move from Columbia, Missouri to Peoria, Illinois led to San Francisco, Johannesburg, Geneva, Raleigh, Peoria, Singapore, and back to Peoria. And the reality of it is I got exactly what I bargained for. The other part of getting to know me is my family. My kids have all heard this presentation, but they've never all been together to hear this presentation. So you can do a quality check on this later. But my wife, Ann, our 3 kids, my daughter-in-law, Katie, and if you hear a scream once in a while in the front row, that's the grandson, Cole. So I'm going to tell the story through somebody who had a family, moved multiple times around the world. But I'd argue, regardless of what your individual situation is, hopefully some of the concepts that I talk about can apply to your own balance. The other one, that picture, I've used it probably in every leadership lecture I've given over the number of years. And the thing that it's always intended to remind me of is I'm still growing into the shoes of what it takes to be a good leader. I'm still growing into the shoes of what it takes to strike a good balance. I think any time in leadership you think you've arrived, it's the beginning of the end. And so as I said earlier, I want you to understand that I'm going to give you a snapshot based on where I'm at this point in time, but it doesn't mean I've got this all figured out. Trust me. All right, so that gives you a little bit of the background. Now, in terms of setting expectations up front, I just want to be clear what you're going to get and maybe what you're not going to get. The first expectation would be, is my approach won't necessarily work for you. Just by the nature, we grew up on a farm, had to do chores. Getting up early was just the way I'm wired. There's people that's torture. And so you're going to hear a lot of my routine is driven by, really getting a lot done early in the morning. And you may be wired in different ways. And so you'll have to figure it out based on who you are and how you work. Second one is there are no silver bullets. This is hard work. As I said, it's a competitive world we live in, and finding the ways to have a rich professional as well as personal career, family is hard work. But I'm telling you, it's absolutely worth the effort. Number 3, it's not about doing less work. If you think this is about just knocking off early, as I said, we live and work in a very competitive global world. So it's not about doing less work, it's about doing the work you do at home or work more efficiently. And I'll kind of take you through a few ideas in terms of that. Another expectation is life won't always be in balance. I mean, you're going to find times where it gets swung out of balance. The global financial crisis is the one that sticks out for me. The fall of '08, uncertainty about where global markets were going and how it was going to play out. And it was all consuming. But while it comes out of balance for a period of time, you just got to have that conscious focus to bring it back in balance over the long term. And being consciously aware of it is a big step of it. And then the last part is it's all a matter of choice. I reference my favorite book a lot, Man's Search for Meaning by a guy named Viktor Frankl. And my favorite line in the book is, "Choice, the last of the human freedoms." And yeah, buddy, I agree, Cole. But all of us make a choice. Now, you made a choice today to be here, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. But you're also going to have a choice leaving, is do you take a tidbit, an idea, or two, and try to apply it in your own personal life. And at the end of the day, that's going to be your choice. The other expectation that for me has always been clear, though, some people say, well, if you strike the balance, isn't that at the expense of the shareholder? And I absolutely do not buy that argument. I mean, if you have a company where if you have people that have good balance, have great relationships, good clarity about what they want at work as well at home, I'm telling you, get productive employees with clear thought. You get people that are out of balance, estranged relationships, struggling at home, you don't get that clarity of thought. And so this is all about what's not only good for the individual, but I'd offer what's good for the company. So just a few expectations up front. As I structure this talk, historically I broken it into three basic categories, and I'm going to take you through those three categories and simply give you some thought provokers in each one of them. Things that I think about as I try to maintain some balance in what is a hectic world today. Number one is I'd offer, if you don't plan your personal life with the same rigor and discipline that you do your professional life, your personal life will suffer. In jobs like many of us have, you can work 24/7. I mean, there's always something to do. And so if you're consumed by that and planning strictly on the professional side and not taking the time to use the same discipline to plan your personal life, that personal life will suffer. And so the first point I'll talk about is making that plan. Secondly is efficiency will set you free. I learned a lot in this area when we headed down the path of CPS and elimination of waste and deploying lean. Because many of the concepts here are just taking those concepts and applying it to your professional and personal life, and how do you free up time as a result of it. And I'll talk a little bit about it. And then the last point, I just believe in today's world, especially the global nature of today's world, you have to be a corporate athlete. And I'd offer that great athletes are healthy mentally as well as physically, and I'll take you through a few of those. So let me walk through these three areas and just give you a little bit of a feel for at least how I think about it and trying to strike balance in my own life. Number one is make a plan. For us as a family, it always started with the vision, if you would, purpose. We will positively impact the people and responsibilities experienced throughout life. And when you have a family vision statement like that and you end up with a challenge like I've got, it gives you a pretty good guide on what you need to do about it. And we've consistently held this true as a family for decades. Now it goes back 25 years. And it provides a great guide for us. In terms of the family values, we focus on self-esteem. We build self-esteem. I mean, if you look at them, a lot of them you can think about, it was the early days, the kids were young when we first started this. And self-esteem was when you got an older brother giving two younger sisters a hard time. Honesty. teaching that we always tell the truth, the importance of integrity, which is the value that transcends all people's lives and businesses. That was absolutely critical for us. Faith. I won't talk a lot about faith because of the different perspectives people have, but I will say it has to be the cornerstone of your life if you want that balance, and it for certain has been the cornerstone for us. But talking to our kids as we introduce them to it, being faithful to God and in our family. Competitive spirit, teaching them as they entered sports in the early days that we try hard and play fair, but then having them understand that applies in life as well. When you work in a big company, competitive spirit, playing. Somebody asked me recently, how did you compete with people at Caterpillar to get ahead? And my comment is, I never competed with the guy next to me. The concept was always to focus on the problem at hand, effectively solve that problem, collaborate with others to get that done. That's how you get ahead, not at the expense of someone else. Respect, we respect each other and those in authority. That was really as they got into school, and respecting teachers, one of the great professions. Somewhere in society, we made a shift. When I was young at that Catholic school in Pilot Grove, Missouri, if I got in trouble at school, the base assumption was the teacher was right and I was wrong. And somewhere we've got that a little bit backwards these days, but we wanted our values to reflect that that's the way it is. And then lastly, responsibilities. We meet our commitments and fulfill our responsibilities, whatever they may be in life. And what we were really looking for was for this to simply be a compass to guide the family. And trust me, this is not one just focused on our kids. It was very focused on the accountability Ann and I had. And as I'll talk later, the kids held us accountable just like we held them accountable. Now, in the corporate world, strategy development is relatively easy. Its implementation is the hard part. And so just some of the practices that we've deployed through the years to try to have that vision and those values come to life, just get down to some of the basic practices we had as a family. The first one is it does have to be a shared vision. I think the husband and wife or partner, whatever your situation may be, it's got to be a shared vision. And I learned this the hard way early on. Ann and I got married in 1983. Our good neighbor from across the street, Bob Larson, is actually here tonight. In the fall of that year, we got home from church on a Sunday. The Bears were playing football, and I'd flipped the TV on. And Ann came in, and she said, I've been reading this magazine, and it's got an exercise designed for young couples who've just gotten married. And the exercise is designed where you list everything that you'd like to change about me, and I'll list everything that I'd like to change about you. And then we'll exchange lists. So we get it out of the way, so we don't have to deal with it for the rest of our marriage. Now, I knew this probably wasn't a good idea, okay? So I was trying to watch the football game. And she just kept going and she kept going. And so anyway, she handed me a piece of paper and a pen, and she took one. And out of the corner of my eye, I looked over, and she's just writing away. And I mistakenly thought, well, there's a few things I'd like to change. And so I made my list. So she goes, okay, ready? Switch. She folded it over, handed it to me. I opened it up, and it said, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Needless to say, that's not what my list said. And as she'll tell you, she still has that list. And as I'll tell you, 3 of those 5 things she still needs to work on. But it's no different than doing this in business. And you got to do it in partnership. And I think more importantly, it's with that partner, that spouse, the other person you're doing it with. Second one is, I'm a big believer in driving your calendars around what are your priorities. I'll talk about that later from a business perspective. Same concept applies from the personal perspective. And trust me, I understand that in a job like I've had, you do not get free reign on your calendar. I mean, there's board meetings, and during my time under Jim or time under Doug, they had their agendas, their calendars. There's dealer meetings, supplier meetings, things that had to be, just done. But once that was done, then the next priority for me was to set the family calendar for the year. And I just always took the approach of tagging it onto kind of the holiday weekends, the 3-day weekends, Easter, Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, where you could, take 3-4 days vacation and get a full week. And that was just the approach that I took. And the other one was always knowing what the special days were. Now, trust me, I missed, birthdays. For the first, until the kids were about 6 or 7, we had them convinced that their birthday was always on Saturday, because Dad could always be home. But then, like I said, that didn't work forever. And yeah, I missed them. But there were a lot of times where I made a heck of an extra effort. My favorite is, picture that we have is, the family is, I'd missed my daughter Allie's junior prom or senior prom was coming. I was traveling. I was scrambling through an airport, trying to catch the flight, running, carrying bags, catch that, flight into Raleigh, land, come home. And the picture is her in her prom dress giving me a hug, and I've got a suitcase in one hand and a briefcase in the other. And the point is that making that extra effort, building that calendar around it is really important. And not only personally, but professionally. But another big part of it is just making it a priority. With a travel job, and if there's one area that I really would encourage anybody to do is really to make that time for that family dinner. It was probably the thing that I appreciated the most. I was fortunate in that Ann was always very understanding. If I said I needed more time in the work, she said, I completely understand. Go in earlier. But we really, made a commitment for that time around the dinner table. And, there were times in my days in Geneva on a phone call, it's getting late, it's close to 7, we'd typically eat dinner sometime a little bit after that. And I would simply say, hey, have we wrapped everything else? I've got a commitment outside the office. Now, that commitment just happened to be my family. But I would have done the exact same thing if it would have been a dealer in town, a supplier, or a customer. Why wouldn't I make the same commitment for family? Because that time around the dinner table for us was absolutely critical. And it really was a big part of our communications. One of our routines was high-lows. What's the best thing that happened to you today, and what's the worst thing that happened to you today? And we'd go around the table, and it applied to all of us. And there were parts of that discussion that were painful. When we moved from Geneva to Raleigh, for 6 months, Allie and Steph's low was that they lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. Now, that's painful as a parent, but at least we knew where they were at. I remind both of those girls that they later chose to go back to North Carolina to go to college. I get little credit for that, but I do remind them. The other one, and I think this is, 90% of the world's problems do relate to a breakdown in communication. And I think in a family unit, if you can maintain communication, you can overcome a lot of things. And, I learned a valuable lesson early on. I have the ability to multitask. I thought that was a strength. I could have a ball game on in the background, have a discussion with Ann and be working, on a laptop. She'd ask me a question, and I'd go, mm-hmm. And she goes, you didn't hear what I said. And I could repeat it verbatim, and it irritated the heck out of her. But I found out from our daughter Stephanie that it wasn't a strength. I was sitting at my desk writing a document. She stood at my side, asked me a question, and I answered her while continuing to write. And she grabbed my chin, she turned it to her, and she said, Daddy, look at me when I talk to you. And it's a lesson I have never forgot. In today's world, and I mentioned the statistics about the amount of time parents and adolescent teenagers communicate, but as you communicate, do you square your shoulders? Is it eyeball to eyeball? Are you listening? Is your phone buzzing? Are you distracted? Are you checking an email? Are you finishing their sentence? And if you can overcome that and be a great listener and keep the communication lines open and accept the fact that every member of the family is going to want to communicate in a different way. Steph wanted me to look at her. Jay, we spent most of our communication time on the basketball court. Allie, today she likes Sunday conversations. where she gets more dedicated time. But if you can keep the communication lines open, I think you just do great things in terms of trying to strike that balance. And then choose hobbies the family can enjoy. I'm an avid golfer. I love the game. I gave it up for 10 years when we lived in Europe. And as I said, my golf game went downhill, but my downhill skiing was much improved because it was a sport that we did together as a family all the time. And I went from teaching them to ski to now not being able to keep up with them as they ski. And then lastly is never forget the significant other. Some of my favorite memories of the time with Ann were coffee and croissant in Geneva. Kids were growing up, sleeping in on Saturdays, and her and I'd take the first bus downtown. We'd go to a coffee shop, we'd have a coffee and croissant, then we'd walk Old Town. Then we'd come down by the Fresh Market, we'd pick up items for lunch and then catch the bus back. And by that time, the kids were just kind of coming, to life. And it's a little hard to get a good croissant in Peoria, but, date nights, whatever it is, you've got to find those routines. As you go on this journey in whatever choice you make, the one thing you've got to be aware of, though, is that your kids will push back and they will hold you accountable for this. I was working with Debbie Salazar, who's my communicator, and between her and Dina Nielsen, they just do a great job of supporting me. And I was in a meeting, and I always leave my BlackBerry back then or phone, aside. I pay attention to the people presenting. And anyway, when the meeting was over, I'd gotten a text from my daughter, Stephanie. And what you can't see is she goes, "I haven't got a response from you in a while." And my response was, "Steph, I do have a day job." To which she responded, "And a full-time job of being a father. Just remember who's going to be there when you finally retire." And so, Steffi, if I come hang out with you, remember, you asked for it, okay? All right. So, step number one is plan that personal life with the same rigor and discipline you do your professional life, or your personal life will suffer. Now let's move to step number two, improved efficiency, elimination of waste. How do you free up time to do some of the things that maybe mean a lot to you? And these are just some thought provokers on things that could possibly work for you. Number one, as I said earlier, I'm a big believer in getting it out of the way in the morning. It's the reason I've never hit the snooze alarm is because when I was raised, we had 4 boys, and 2 of us did chores in the morning and 2 of them did at night, and we rotate the following week. And the rule was, first one to the barn got to pick if he watered or fed. And watering was a lot easier because you could do it through the fence instead of trying to slop hogs with big buckets. And when I was, 7, 8, 9 years old, that was hard work. So I was always going to be first to the barn. And it's a habit that's just stuck to me, for the rest of my life. So getting up early has been a routine. But when the kids were all at home in Geneva, I'd go out for my morning run sometime around 5:15, come back, walk the dog I never wanted, have my breakfast, clean my emails, and then I'd wake the kids up, and they'd get ready while I'd shower, and then I'd take them to school. And we had a favorite CD of songs. Ben's Mix is what it was called. We still listen to it today. Some of it involved rap music, although they've made me promise never to rap in public. But we'd get to school, and between school and work, I'd call in, clean my Audex, the messages that had come in through the night. And so by the time I got to my office, I'd had exercise, right breakfast, spent time with the kids, walked the dog, and, cleaned emails and Audexes. But, more importantly, I'd given Ann a break because I wasn't there every morning. But it was just a good, efficient use of time. And that's the reason I've always held on to being an early riser and getting a great start on the day. Another one is email. If I walk up and see, over somebody's shoulder, and I see just a mountain of emails, I just cringe. I don't know how you do it. And for those of you who've worked with me, I'll give you a guaranteed 24-hour response time. Now, The response may be pretty simple. Okay, fine, agree, forge ahead, keep pushing, whatever. But it's pretty straightforward. You know, for me on emails, I file, forward, action, or delete. And rarely do I let them just sit there and fester. I think, you know, people can get consumed by it, and I think there's some things you can do to speed that up and free up some time as you do it, which really gets down to the use of technology. We all need to remember technology was put in place or developed to allow us to be more productive, to find more time to do things that we like to do. You know, and it's a great servant, but it is a bad master. And that's one of the things I'm going to challenge you with. Today in your life, I think you got to assess, are you in control of your technology, or is the technology in control of you? I talked about 57% of families say that technology has ruined their definition of a family dinner. You know, personally, I'm not a believer in an iPhone or a BlackBerry that buzzes or beeps. I mean, we're not trained monkeys. It's productivity tools that are there for our use, to drive our productivity, not to drive us. And I think there's some great tools in terms of technology, but I think you've got to be in control of those tools. Meetings, you know, as I've gone through my journey at CAT, I've had some wonderful people who've made huge influences and in terms of the way I try to strike the balance. Bob Selasky was an early leader who taught me so much. Another one that was really key for me was my administrative assistant in Geneva, Monique Kolika. You know, 4'11", you know, Swiss German, and she just ran it like a tight ship. And she recognized the fact that with the travel I had when I was in the office, I was being absolutely consumed by meetings. And she was the one who said, let's change it up. Every meeting's 30 minutes. And the conversation would be along the lines of, hey, I need a meeting with Ed. And her response would be, he's only got 30 minutes. Just send your recommendation and the advanced material. And if the response was, well, I don't have a recommendation or advanced material, her response was, are you sure you're ready for a meeting with Ed? And I think that's one for us as leaders to always think about. You know, completed staff work, keeping, you know, work off your boss's desk is what we're here to do. I think it's what we all really want to do. And the reality of it is, if I had a meeting request where I got advanced material with a clear recommendation and I agreed with it, my response was, I agree, no need for meeting. But if you do an assessment of the amount of time in your calendar that's consumed by not having completed work, I think it may be another way to free up a little time along the way. Travel time, for those of you who have travel jobs, I've always believed it to be work. Not that I'm a workaholic when I'm on the road, it's just that I want to be free to do other things when I'm home. And a standard process for me was just to surf my calendar out 30, 60, 90 days and see what kind of project work I had coming at me so I could do it while I was on an airplane. I mean, I don't think we can complain about the lack of balance in our life and watch 2 movies on an international flight. You know, I think that's time that you've got to get those things done so you can free up the time when you get back here. And then for those, especially in a dual income situation, I think you absolutely have to simplify your life. I think you just look at what are the opportunities to outsource, to you know, in this example, I just don't do lawns. I mean, I wasn't home on a regular basis in terms of getting it, and I just removed that as an issue. But if you in dual income situations, I think you look at the things that take the most time, that you enjoy the least, and that's a good starting place on opportunities to maybe outsource and free up some opportunities. And then the last one on efficiency for me are the 5 C's of leadership. Now, when I was walking through this with Ann the other night, the 5 C's, she goes, oh, you're going to talk about buying me a diamond. The 5 C's of leadership for me are the ones that really drive efficiency in an organization. Because how do you get the best out of a broad-based organization, especially one that's global? And for me, the 5 steps have always been, number 1 is absolute clarity of direction. In 2006, we had a worldwide dealer meeting, and Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, was there. And somebody asked him the question, what are common characteristics of companies that go from good to bad? And his response was chronic inconsistency. If your organization doesn't know where you're going, what the priorities are, they're going to be all over the place. So if you want to drive efficiency in your life, I think it starts in providing great clarity to your organization on what you want. Second one is you got to cascade it down the organization and making sure you're getting leverage out of your entire organization. I learned a lot about leadership from a guy named Giancarlo Bertoluzzo, who ran the dealership in northern Italy, and he used to tell the story about cascading his message down his organization, and how there was a marble quarry in Carrera, and the owner of the quarry walked in, and he talked to the young man who was working in the quarry, and he asked him, "What do you do?" And the young man said, "I just shape stones. I shape stones from the time I get here in the morning to the time I go home at night. I just shape stones." And the quarry owner went home that night and didn't feel good about the way his employee felt about his job. He went in the next day. He grabbed the young man and he took him from the quarry down into the village where they were building the great cathedral, and he showed him where in the great cathedral his stones were going. He went into the quarry the next day and he said to the young man, "What's your job?" And the young man said, "I build great cathedrals." And if you want to drive efficiency in your life and free up time, if you can get every employee in your organization understanding what role they play, what stone they're shaping to drive your overall strategy, trust me, you're going to have time to do some of the other things that you want in your life. Third C is cadence. For me, I think driving a cadence around execution is critical. In a complex, intertied, matrixed organization like CAT, a cadence around execution really drives focus. And for me, firsthand experience of that started really with the BCP quality journey we were on. And we used it big time in the global financial crisis as we tried to align the entire organization around some of the things we were trying to get done. But you got to have cadence. The fourth one is calendar. Like I said, just like on your personal life, I build my calendar around my priorities professionally. What are the few things that are going to make the biggest difference, and then drive your calendar accordingly. When I stepped out of construction industries in the fall of 2014, the schedule for 2015 was already set. When I stepped now out of resource industries, the calendar for 2016 had already been set. And in our factories, we measure something called OEE. What is the return, if you would, the amount of time the equipment is doing as it should intend? And as leaders, I think you always got to ask yourself the question, what is your personal OEE? How much of your leadership time is spent on those few things that make the biggest difference? And then the fifth C is I think you just got to let your employees know you really care. If they know you legitimately care about who they are as a person, as a parent, as a friend, the amount of effort, the amount of support, the amount of everything else you get out of that. So for me, while there are a lot of examples of things you can do to free up time, you get the 5 C's right, and a lot of others really come to pass. And these are not new concepts. Peter Drucker wrote a book in 1963 called The Effective Executive. And I think that's the challenge of leadership is how do you understand it's not about the individual capability that you have that maybe you studied in university that's really going to determine how much you can impact and make a difference. It really gets down to can you manage, motivate, and lead people. And so step number 2, efficiency will set you free. It's not about doing less work. It's about doing the work you do more effectively. These are just a few thoughts of things to maybe help in that regard, which gets us to the third leg, and that's being a corporate athlete. And as I said earlier, I think the great athletes have the health mentally as well as physically. Let's start on the mental side. Reading and TV I'd put into kind of the same category. In the U.S. at least, average person now is watching more than 4 hours TV a day, which By the age of 16, an average young person in the U.S. will have witnessed 200,000 acts of violence. On newspapers, the cover stories are typically, murders, wars, today, politics. Good news is on page 11. And I just think you've got to apply a filter if you want to have a healthy mental outlook about things. I think you got to apply a filter on TV, on reading. The example I use on TV, Chris Berman, USA Today did a study that said from the time a football is snapped to when the whistle is blown in a football game that lasts 3 hours on TV, the time between the snap and the whistle is 11 minutes and 42 seconds. And, highlights with Chris Berman is just a more efficient way to get, that information. On making a list, the older I get, the more I have to make lists. Priorities is probably my favorite app where I track everything. Sometimes drives some of the people around me a bit crazy, but it does free my mind. If I look at the healthy mind, the two areas that I wish I would have been better was in the areas of stress management and mind control relaxation. It's the hardest thing for me to do. On the stress management, I take it in my shoulders, and I was constantly trying to remind myself, to relax. Mind control relaxation is basically taking yourself to just the point of falling asleep and then coming out of it, and it's a great way to refresh. And it's been the hardest thing for me to do. And in my new challenge, it's one of the things I've got to get better in terms of mentally giving myself that break, that rest. But I think mentally we all need that break, that rest. And then the last one is, at the end of the day, who gets to choose what kind of day you have? I had a great colleague at Caterpillar who's retired, Jim Teveball, and he used to say, every day is a terrific day. Some more terrific than others. And, many of you have traveled the world just like I have. You've seen, poverty and strife and oppression, and I'm sorry, regardless of the situation, every day is a terrific day. And the only person that gets to choose, your boss doesn't choose your attitude, your spouse doesn't choose your attitude. Your outlook on each and every day really gets down to your choice. And I think if you put life in perspective, you maybe would agree that life is good. All right, so mentally, some ideas. Physically, a lot of people are really dreading this part, and I always tell them, well, exercise is mandatory. As I said earlier, I just don't believe there's an excuse. In fact, I think it's a trade-off. The more I exercise, the less sleep I need. I think a lot of people respond that way. But if you lead a global organization and you show up, in some part of the world and you come off a plane, they're not interested in a tired executive from the Midwest. They're looking for somebody who's engaging, who's asking tough questions, who's walking the shop floor, who's making a difference when you're visiting dealers or customers around the world. And I just don't think you can do that without being a corporate athlete and taking care of yourself physically. As you do that, it's got to be a routine or a habit. You can't say, I'm going to casually start running. You got to build it into your schedule. It can be something casually that you just think, well, I'm going to start doing it. It's got to be a routine and a habit. If it's something you love, then it's all the better. And this is really, really hard for me. Two of the things that I loved in terms of exercise were playing basketball and jogging. And I can't do them anymore. But I loved that part of exercise. And so, yeah, physically it was a good workout, but I never looked at it that way because I had so much fun doing it. You think peer pressure or a partner really makes it easier? My days in California, there were 3 of us that met on the corner at 5:30 every morning to go for a run, and if you were home and didn't show up, the deal was we would go knock on the person's door. Waking up a wife and 3 kids isn't a good way to get your day started. That peer pressure showed up. Now today, that peer pressure comes in the electronic form. 2 of my nephews, their wives challenged my brother and I on Fitbit just this last week. And I think they underestimated me a bit. But that peer pressure is really healthy, and it really keeps you honest. And it's just some of the tools that are available. Probably the tool that I think maybe is the most illuminating is one called MyFitnessPal. And I talk here about your diet and would you put that in your tank. I'm amazed how people will go to unbelievable lengths to make sure that their pets get the right food. They will go to unbelievable lengths to make sure that they put the right petroleum or gas in their cars, but won't take the time to really understand what they're putting in to themselves. And MyFitnessPal, you track it for 30 days, and you'll probably see some opportunities to improve, because I think it's got to be both, proper diet as well as exercise. And then probably the area that I learned later on and didn't do well in the early days is this whole concept of muscle confusion. I was a 3.5 to 4 mile a morning runner forever. And my favorite book on this topic is Younger Next Year. And it talks about how you got to confuse. And so you got to rotate between different forms of exercise as you do this. So just a few, things to maybe push you a bit in terms of being a corporate athlete, both mentally and physically. And you could say, Ed, you're talking about this, but look what happened to you. Well, trust me, my physical condition was a big help. When I started struggling to jog, I knew I had a problem because I was a runner. And an early diagnosis in this disease helps. And the second, as I go into fighting the disease, it's nice to start the fight in fighting condition, all right? So that takes you kind of through the 3 steps. Plan your personal life with the same rigor and discipline as your personal life as you do your professional. 2, efficiency will set you 3, and the third one is be that corporate athlete. If you walk through them, there's some common themes. One is discipline and habit, and we're all creatures of habit. If you wake up every morning today and you brush your teeth with your right hand, if for the next 30 days you force yourself to brush it with your left hand, you will brush your teeth with your left hand for the rest of your life. I mean, it's the way the mind works. It's the way habits are formed. The second common theme that I think in terms of applying these principles is all built around goal setting supported by affirmations. In 1960, the graduating class of Harvard, 3% of the student body had written goals and objectives. 30 years later, they had 90% of the wealth of the class. That's not to say this is applied, just about wealth. It just shows the power of goals, putting it in writing, and affirming to it. If you have a habit you want to change, the subconscious, the only way you're going to do it is to reach down in that subconscious, and you've got to pull it out. And the only way to do that is to affirm to who you want to be. Now, prior to November 5th, my affirmations were pretty clear. I have a positive romantic relationship with my wife, Ann, as we work together to raise 3 positive contributing kids and successfully launch them into adulthood. I'm a group president at Caterpillar, known for my leadership development and communication skills, as well as my ability to bounce requirements between home and work and build great leaders in those around me. I'm an active listener and a continual learner. And because I've gotten exactly what I want, I never complain about the hours to work or travel. I love getting up at 5 o'clock and exercising hard because I'm younger next year. I watch what I eat and watch what I drink as I feed this vibrant and dynamic body. At the end of the day, the Lord has created this day. Let us rejoice and give praise. He will look out over my family, and He will look out over me. Now, it wasn't that I did that each and every day. But when my actions were inconsistent with what I was affirming to, trust me, my subconscious was knocking on my door and saying, hey, who are you? Now, I got my diagnosis on November 5th, and on November 7th, I wrote my new affirmations. And I got, a different battle that I'm fighting. But we're going to take the same tool set and apply it to the new challenge in life as we've done in the past. So if you took all this and you asked the question, okay, how do I if there's one or two in here that really want to do something different, how would you go about it? This would be my suggested recipe. Number one, I get back to the point I made earlier. I think you have to assess, are you in control of your technology or is it in control of you? I think it's a fundamental breakdown in the way people manage their lives today. And I would just ask you to do the assessment, are you in control or not? Number two is select 2 to 3 goals. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to change everything you do. Pick a couple places and take some of these concepts for a test drive. If I could suggest one of those, I think that family dinner structure is maybe the most important part of a family. And if I was going to push in a direction to pick one of those goals, it would be there. 3 would be to do that waist walk. Go back over your calendar 30, 60, 90 days and just assess between the way you run meetings or the way you allocate your time on weekends or whatever, how much waste is there that you can eliminate and free up time to do some of the other things that you want to do to achieve your goals and objectives. I think you may be pleasantly surprised on how much free time is there. Number 4 is you have to clearly articulate it, and you have to put it in writing. I mean, it just doesn't happen unless you clearly articulate it. And the more vividly you envision the end state, the more powerful that articulation, that vision is going to be. And then lastly, you got to build it into your daily schedule. How do you wire it around? How do you start your mornings? What do you do during the day? How do you finish at night? Because at the end of the day, one good day, you do it 7 times, you get a good week. You do it 4 times, you get a good month. You do it 12 times, you get a good year. You do it over and over again, and at the end of the day, you get a great life. And so that's the prescription, if you would, the recipe that I'd suggest you follow. And I think it's important that you do it because at the end of the day, Robert Louis Stevenson said it very well. Perpetual devotion to what man or woman, calls his business can only be sustained by perpetual neglect of many other things. When I talk to young professionals, and I tell them often, to purely pursue professional goals and objectives at the expense of everything and everything else, you may achieve a lot professionally, but you're going to get to the end and it's going to be a shallow victory. I always knew that there was going to be a day when I left CAT and the job title and the office and all the support and having somebody at every airport ever landed in the world there to pick me up was going to go away. And at that point in time, I was going to revert back to Stephanie having to spend time with her dad. And that was always okay with me. But there's no doubt that my current situation is even illuminated this more clearly. Literally 100 days ago, if I would have stood before this group, I would have stood before you as a potential future consideration for somebody who could maybe have led Caterpillar. And 100 days later, I'm standing here telling you between tonight and tomorrow night, goodbye. And it does show you that life throws you a curveball. And the balance that you strike in your life can really help. And for me, that balance has come and been secured through a strong faith, a great family and friends, and no regrets. I've loved every step of the journey to date. And a huge part of that support network for me are the people that I've referred to many times tonight. And 1981, I went in and bought a new car. I've now been married to the loan officer for 33 years. And as I always tell the story, I traded that car in 3 years later, but I've been making payments ever since. But you could not have asked, for a better life partner. And, our journey with Caterpillar around the world and some of the dear friends and colleagues that I see here tonight, it's just been absolutely, blessings beyond what we ever would have dreamed of. Jay, he works at Merrill Lynch. He's I talked about the basketball, and we spent a bunch of our time on the basketball court. I've had to resign from that, and a lot of our competition today is on a a golf course. We've got a card that we pass back and forth. It's the father-son challenge, and whoever wins, retains, if you would, the card. But I ended up a best man on his wedding. It tells you maybe some of this balance stuff through the years, maybe worked. Allie is on the far left for you guys. She is her mom made over. There's times when she's in one of her rare moods, Jay or Steph will send me a note and say, Allie is being so mom. And that's a really good thing. But moving to the next phase of life, I think the timing is really good. She's just taken over as team lead on the night shift and the emergency room at Rex Hospital. She's engaged to get married and building a house, and I think having a little bit of Dad's help is going to be just fine. Stephanie is probably the one who's most like me, much to her dismay. And, a lot of times I'll go to say something and she'll finish my sentence. And she says, Dad, you're so predictable. And my response is, predictability is a good trait in a father. And I think it's a good trait in a leader as well. I think the further she progresses, she works for Deloitte, and I think the further she progresses in her professional career, the more being a little bit like Dad probably isn't all that bad. But is a great part of the support network that really make my family special. And the great thing is the family is expanded. I took all 3 of my kids to the University of Missouri and tried to convince them to follow me as a Mizzou Tiger. All 3 failed. When I was there with Stephanie, I said, this is your chance to be the favorite. And her response was, I already am. But I got there through the back door. And our son married a wonderful young lady, Katie. She's a Mizzou grad. And she's okay with a father-in-law who goes out for a morning walk, shows up at 7:15 to hang around with Cole. And then that gets me to the last member of the family. The picture was one from Cole's first birthday here about 30 days ago. His name is Cole Edward, although the only time I've heard Edward is when he's been in trouble. But I think he's going to be a huge part of my therapy going forward. And so I'm blessed with a very strong network. And it's maybe a way to kind of close it off. I know there's a lot of people that have expressed a lot of concerns on the challenges that we face, but I want you to know, we're going to be okay. Like I said, based on that foundation of a strong faith and great family and friends and really no regrets. The other one that you need to understand is I've been working on hitting a curveball for a long time. This is a picture from 1970. I'm the guy in the lower left-hand corner. KWRT, and the coach up in the top right was Coach Jackson. And he used to always say, Rapp, if you're going to hit a curveball, you got to stay in the box. And trust me, I'm going to stay in the box. And the other one he said, you got to keep your balance. And hopefully from the discussion tonight, you understand at least some of the things I've tried to do through the years to strike that balance. And so I really appreciate the fact that you made the effort to be here. Joe, I really appreciate the push in terms of quote unquote the last lecture. And while I have the opportunity to say a few words tomorrow night as well, I won't miss the nonstop travel and the meetings at all hours of the day and emails that keep rolling out. But the opportunities to engage with people like this is something that I will forever miss. Thank you.